Hello, my name is Dr. Gibson, and today we are going to talk about the effects of gender and race in negotiations. If you have any questions, contact me at gibson@tc.edu. Let's begin.
At the end of this lesson, you should be able to define gender, define race, understand key findings in research on the effects of gender in negotiation, understand key findings in research on the effects of race in negotiation, understand intersectionality effects, understand stereotyping and stereotype threat theory, and understand real-world applications. What is gender? Gender refers to one's intrinsic understanding of being female, male, both of these, neither of these, or another identity. In Western culture, gender is primarily characterized as being either female, male, or constructed on a woman-man binary. And the bulk of research in the social and organizational sciences conceptualizes gender through this designation as well. What is race? The expression race refers to an individual's social, cultural, and physical differences that amounts from membership in specific social identity groups. Examples of racial ethnic groups in the United States include African Americans, Asian Americans, Euro-Caucasian Americans, Hispanic non-white Americans, and Native Americans. Above all measures of diversity, age, sexual orientation, nationality, language, gender has historically been the most studied dimension in psychological research. Various studies across the social and organizational sciences have found that men and women receive different outcomes in a range of bargaining tasks. Indeed, findings from the labs and the field largely show that gender differences exist in bargaining contexts, with men receiving more favorable financial outcomes than women. Studies across the organizational sciences show that men have a greater propensity to initiate negotiations in Western contexts, which has been proposed as an essential antecedent to claiming value at the bargaining table. The current literature suggests that when it comes to compensation, men are more likely to ask for higher levels than their female counterparts, despite having similar levels of qualifications and experience. The research also suggests that men are more likely to ask for promotions as well. Consequently, over time, men have higher levels of starting salary, income, and promotion rates than their female counterparts. Indeed, while nearly 2/3 of MBA male graduates negotiated their starting salaries before starting their jobs, only 1/8 of female graduates asked for anything beyond their first offer. As a result, male graduates from the business school had 8.5% higher starting salaries than their female graduate counterparts, a difference that compounds over the course of a lifetime. These findings speak to the economic consequences that can emerge from not speaking up during financial decision-making tasks. Mazzi and colleagues found that differences between gender groups in propensity to initiate negotiations were reversed when women experienced the lowest conditions of role incongruity. Role congruity theory assumes that when an individual's behavior and social role match, they are more likely to be seen as successful in that role. However, if an individual's behavior is inconsistent with a particular social role, then they are more likely to be seen as unsuccessful in that role. Research shows that the likelihood to engage in negotiations increases when there is a greater match between the individual and the negotiation topic at hand. Baer and Babcock found that when the bargaining table concerned matters of childcare, a traditionally feminine subject, gender differences between initiation rates decreased due to a more significant role congruency between one's gender role and the topic under negotiation for women. Both Bowles et al. Found that when women advocated on behalf of others, a behavior that communicates communalism and relationship building behavior, which is a prescriptive norm for women, they are seen as more effective negotiators than when they negotiate on behalf of themselves. Why do differences exist? At the heart of many of these gender differences are stereotypes. Common descriptive stereotypes about men are that they are assertive, competitive, confident, independent, dominant, and rational. On the other hand, women, with few exceptions, are described as being communal, emotional, and acting with concern for others. Different expectations exist for men and women on behaviors that are deemed socially appropriate in competitive and agentic contexts. In many cases, women are disadvantaged due to a presumed lack of fit between their attributes and the behaviors considered essential for the negotiator role. Backlash or punishment of those who violate prescriptive norms maintains the rigidity of stereotypes and normalizes gender roles. For example, whereas men can exhibit agentic behaviors and not be penalized socially for doing so, women often experience a social backlash for behaving competitively in stereotypically masculine situations. This misalignment among the feminine gender role that demands communalism and the role of the negotiator that demands agency creates the potential for social backlash to occur. Thus, when women act assertively, they're often penalized socially for doing so, due to the violation of the prescriptive role of being communal. While findings exploring the role gender plays in negotiations have gained popularity in the popular press and the empirical literature, investigations looking at the impact of racial ethnicity in negotiations have been less prevalent and forthcoming. Most research on group differences by racial-ethnic group in negotiation tasks have found a main effect for race, with people of color experiencing lower outcomes than their European American counterparts. This effect has been demonstrated across a wide variety of economic bargaining situations. For example, in a series of field studies conducted at American car dealerships, Ayers found that car salesmen quoted lower prices to European American buyers than they did to African American buyers. Ayers and Singelman also found racial discrimination during the car bargaining process. While in a different setting than salary negotiations, these series of studies provide limited evidence that racial ethnicity has an impact on the economic outcomes of people of color. In a study looking at propensity to initiate negotiations between African Americans and European Americans, Crosby found European Americans were more likely to negotiate for more ambiguous aspects of employment, such as promotions, bonuses, and stock options relative to African Americans. More recently, Hernandez and colleagues found that African American job seekers negotiated lower salaries than their European American counterparts, especially when the evaluator was high on social dominance orientation. Price found that European American negotiators were rated higher than their African American counterparts on likability and were also rated to be more hireable, conditions that are both necessary for employment. Although scarce in quantity, these studies speak to the role that racial ethnicity plays in influencing negotiation outcomes across a wide variety of contexts. In the United States, racial ethnic groups are stratified, with European Americans occupying the top, African Americans occupying the bottom, and Asian Americans, Arab Americans, and Hispanic Americans in between. Stereotypes of non-white individuals in America tend to be negative. Indeed, stereotypes about African Americans, although changing in valence and consistency, carry largely negative connotations in today's society. Perhaps the most debilitating stereotype is that African Americans are unintelligent. Given that competency ratings are closely tied to economic rewards and outcomes in the workplace, operating against a negative stereotype around intelligence can greatly hinder processes in which competency is deemed important. What is intersectionality? In describing women's experiences from minority racial-ethnic groups, this theory suggests that patterns of classism, racism, and sexism combine to inform the lived experiences of women of color more robustly and accurately than examining these systems of oppression separately. Central to this idea is that when individuals belong to two or more oppressed categories, occupying that space can result in invisibility simply because there's a lack of discourse to discuss the specific oppression brought on by that particular position in society. In recent decades, the term intersectionality has been used to explore various intersectional social categories of marginalization. For example, to describe the experiences of student veterans, transgender parents, and working class entrepreneurs, to name a few. Gender and racial ethnicity are arguably the two social identity categories that have been found to generate the most meaning for individuals across contexts. Indeed, by the age of 3, children can accurately apply gender labels to themselves and others. By the age of 5, children can accurately apply racial labels, a process that is learned sooner by racial ethnic minority children who often have early experiences with race. When it comes to research on negotiation, studies looking at the intersection of gender and racial ethnicity have been few and far in between. However, the investigations that have tackled this complex intersection have found that both gender and racial category membership impacts negotiation behavior. Indeed, Tuzzi and colleagues found that although gender differences existed among European American participants when it came to requests for higher salaries, Asian American men and women did not differ significantly on the amount of salary they requested. These findings speak to the fact that gender dynamics unearthed during the body of research on negotiation tasks may primarily apply to European American men and women. Certainly, it highlights the need to explore both gender and racial ethnicity in conjunction, for if only one category of difference was considered, this particular interaction would be lost. Hightower found that African American women experienced greater social backlash for initiating salary negotiations than European American women. This effect was largely driven by competency ratings. While European American women who negotiated were seen as more competent than their non-negotiating counterparts, for African American women, the opposite effect was true. African American women who negotiated their salary were seen as less competent than their non-negotiating counterparts. These studies show a significant relationship between racial ethnicity and perception of competency, with differences in judgments varying by racial ethnic group membership for women. This finding provides additional evidence on the influential nature that not only gender but race can also play during salary negotiation tasks. What role does stereotype threat play? Stereotype threat theory refers to the psychological threat of corroborating a negative stereotype about a social group in which one holds membership. Stereotype threat is more likely to be triggered in circumstances where the stereotype in question is pertinent for performance. For example, intelligence for promotion in a technical position or athletic prowess for basketball. When stereotype threat is triggered, negatively stereotyped individuals in a particular domain generally exhibit lower performance than individuals who have not been stereotyped negatively. While stereotype threat is an internal stressor, it can be the result of contextual factors that are in the air, such as low demographic representation, token status, or pressures to conform to a dominant organizational culture. In a study on financial decision making, Carr and Steele found that being under stereotype threat during a financial decision making task made women behave in a manner that was more loss and risk avoidant than women not under threat. In contrast, Weaver and colleagues found that men under gender stereotype threat were motivated to take more financial risk and favor more immediate monetary rewards than men not under stereotype threat, suggesting that stereotype threat may affect risk-taking behaviors and likelihood to approach rewards. Gender stereotype threat occurs when there is evidence in the air around negative stereotypes about women. Research shows that when women are under stereotype threat, they ask for lower salary amounts than women who are not under stereotype threat, and all men. In a study on gender motivational factors and stereotype threat, Talhead found that women who were under stereotype threat, by being told that their negotiation performance was diagnostic of their ability, made lower salary requests, lower reservation salaries, and demonstrated more vigilance and less eagerness than women not under gender stereotype threat and men. Thus, when negotiation performance is not deemed diagnostic of ability, gender discrepancies between men and women in negotiation performance disappear. When it comes to research on gender, race, and negotiation, there are a few key takeaways. First, men generally receive more favorable negotiation outcomes in traditionally male-dominated domains, whereas women receive more favorable negotiation outcomes in traditionally female-dominated domains. In general, greater propensity to ask also leads to greater rewards. But discrimination and stereotype threat can impede the negotiation process for women and minority negotiators. We also know that gender and race can intersect in interesting ways at the bargaining table. And lastly, that understanding intersectionality is key to understanding diversity dynamics in negotiations.
Thank you for joining me today as we learned about the effects of gender in negotiations, race in negotiations, and the intersection of the two. If you have any more questions, feel free to email me at gibson@tc.edu. Talk soon.